Good morning, YouTube. Warbles on a lot here. Getting set up for this week's Outsiders and hopefully first dog on the moon. And as you can see, it's raining again. Half an hour ago, it was 4/8 cloud and I was sitting in sunshine. And now it will be an inside Sunday morning broadcast.
Time now for Outsiders. I'm Barry Cassidy and you're not. Thanks, Barry. Time now for Outsiders indeed. Joining me today are lawyer and University of New South Wales Indigenous Law Centre Associate Louise Taylor, Terry Barnes, former Harvard government advisor, now policy consultant at Corbyn Policy Advice, and academic writer and social researcher Dr. Lauren Rosewarne. Let's begin with Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn, the landslide victory to Jeremy Corbyn, re-elected UK Labour leader. How did that happen, right? He lost confidence of 80% of his colleagues post-Brexit, an anti-Semitic row that managed to secure 62% vote in the internal Labour Party election anyway. He wasn't supposed to be here, and yet, here he is.
Always remember, in our party, we have much more in common than that which divides us.
Terry, Conservatives are happy in England because they believe that he's unelectable, guaranteeing them power till the mid-2020s. Is this a fair assumption?
Well, I think it's fair to say that it's one of those classic cases where a party is actually signing its own death warrant for a generation, politically speaking. We have a situation where the Parliamentary Labor Party has absolutely and utterly rejected Jeremy Corbyn as leader. Almost the entire front bench resigned before the leadership challenge was actually called on. That he actually had to go to court to get on the ballot paper. But the rank and file of the Labor Party, especially wound up by a left-wing movement called Momentum, actually has more or less given two fingers to their leadership. And I think the political class on both sides of UK politics, and I think it actually applies to our politics too, given the similarities, that really have to think about what that means, because if they can't appeal to the centre and they can't get their members to come to the centre, we're going to have a real problem in political debate over the next decade or more.
Lauren, do you think the centre is that important? It seems to be that the people in the centre are the ones that, in England, for example, no one wants anymore.
Yeah, and the centre around the world has actually been a sort of strange place that's very coveted by political leaders, but doesn't always win elections. And I think Corbyn's not an example of this, but lots of leaders, when they do this move to the centre, get really, really criticised by their members. I think the Labor Party in Australia is a very good example of this, where moving to the centre is very, very dangerous for party unity.
Terry, with the move towards the centre, or away from the centre actually, with Corbyn, there is this element where you've got Justin Trudeau in Canada, you've got, for example, Jeremy Corbyn's win right now, you've even got Bernie Sanders' popularity during his run-up towards the election. He didn't make it in the end, but he got fairly far.
Yeah.
Is there a thing now where we're going to see Australians perhaps also moving towards the left, the way other countries seem to be shifting?
Well, I think in Australia we're moving towards both the left and the right. But good government and good policy is actually either the centre-left or the centre-right. And I think that the way that the political conversation has been going over the last few years is actually polarising. So we've got very strong hard left elements, particularly those who identify not just with the Greens, but with even further left ideology. But on the right, we have Pauline Hanson and One Nation, we have Rise Up Australia and those other fringe right-wing groups. But we don't have enough sensible centre conversation anymore. And really, I think that politics should be of that centre. It doesn't matter if you're on the left side of the centre or the right, but that's where, if we're talking about stable, good government and good policy, we have to be.
Louise, how do you feel? Is the hardening of the left and the right extremes the norm now? Is there a way to get the dialogue more towards the centre?
Well, I think it's a call for leadership at the end of it all. I think people are looking for political figures who stand for something, and despite Corbyn's unpopularity amongst his colleagues, clearly he has hit the right note with his party membership. And so the challenge will become for him to be able to turn that membership support into support amongst his colleagues, and then be able to convince the rest of the country that they present a viable alternative. And whether or not he can do that is what really is going to be the test of him, I think.
Well, Lauren, we've got that problem now where his next step is shoring up support amongst his colleagues or clearing the deck. Maybe he gets rid of the colleagues entirely and brings in new colleagues, which is the way he should be going.
Yeah, and there's a number of things where he can sort of tick off some victories. I think he's talking about the biggest socialist movement in Europe. He's heading that. So I think that's a sort of feather in his bow. But also, there's the fact that he sort of boosted party membership over the past couple of weeks, where, yeah, you could look at the tactics in terms of a discounted membership, etc., but where party membership is in decline around the world. This is actually a huge victory, particularly in a country like the UK that doesn't have compulsory voting.
Yeah, where the general attitude towards voting seems to be that it's quite a bother, actually.
And an apathy around of affiliating oneself with a political party. So if you can see this as a trend, I think that's something he can take to his colleagues as a victory.
Well, Terry, there is that, where someone like, okay, so Jeremy Corbyn might be seen as someone who's an extreme left point of view, who's now suddenly in the mainstream and has energized a voter base. Same thing is seen by people like the Brexit supporters and so on and so forth. It seems that the people in the center, the more centrist groups, can't energize the voter base. They bore the voter base. And the only ones who actually drive impassioned voting are the ones on the far right and left.
Well, politics, I think, actually should be boring. It should be more boring more often, but because of that. But really, what's happened in the UK with Labor is that not once but twice with the election of Corbyn, the Labor membership has rejected of what they call over in the UK the Blairite consensus, that Tony Blair and Gordon Brown actually brought the party to the centre to make it electable after Margaret Thatcher. And the purists, the ideological purists in the party, reject that. They actually wanted to stand on their principles, their values, rather than on actually being in power to influence them. And really, the best place if you want to be ideologically pure is in permanent opposition. And that's really what I think the Labor Party has chosen in the UK. And I think there are very strong lessons for politicians in Australia.
Louise, what lessons do you think the politicians in Australia should be taking from this?
Well, I think politicians in Australia have a lot to learn about unity, and Jeremy Corbyn, as I said, has that challenge ahead of him. I think both sides of our political spectrum have suffered in the past, and one might imagine might suffer in the future with a lack of political unity and being able to convince people that their own houses are in order such that we feel confident that they are able to run the country. And I think there's some real lessons there for Australian politics in that sense.
Well, there's another lesson, which is polling data and how seriously we should ever take that, right? England at this point has twice now failed to provide, reliable polling data. Once during the election, where the victory turned out to be totally different from what the polling said it would be. And even here, where the bets were there'd be a much closer win for Jeremy Corbyn if he did indeed win. And he said, this is fairly landslide-ish victory. How have we gotten to the point now where maybe even just basic polling is so completely out of touch with what the average person thinks and feels?
That's a very good question. I think actually the polling on Corbyn has been fairly consistent right through this in terms of polling the Labor Party membership. But going back to that question about where politics should be conducted, if you look at the national opinion polls in the UK, the Conservative Party is actually over 40% and the Labor Party is in the mid-20s. So clearly the British population as a whole is not necessarily embracing the Corbyn alternative. But the reliability of polls is always going to be an issue. There's always a margin of error in polls. It's also a question of the methodology of polls. And if you rely too much on them as a politician or as a political campaigner, the risk is that you can actually fall into the trap of believing things as opposed to testing things for yourself. And I think grassroots politics is actually the political class getting out of their ivory tower in Parliament House in Canberra, wherever it happens to be, and actually talking to real people on the ground. And backbench MPs do that very well in Australia and the UK. But I think once you make the ministry, or the shadow ministry as the case may be, you tend to lose touch with reality. And that's, I think, a disconnect in our politics as well as in the UK.
There's Lauren. I read this quote recently by a writer, Alan Moore, who said that in England they've now got women parliamentarians, which they didn't have before. They've now got minority parliamentarians, which they didn't have before, but they still don't have a poor parliamentarian. And one of Jeremy Corbyn's big selling points apparently seems to be that he's from a middle-class background. How much of this comes down to that that class conflict in England?
There's also lots of institutional barriers that stop people going into politics in the first place. But I think that Corbyn provides a kind of symbol to people who've been disenfranchised through what's considered to be a political establishment, that there are options for them. Now, whether that's to inspire them to actually go into politics themselves, or at least to engage a little more in the process, I think there is a symbolism there. But again, that type of influence takes a really long time to measure in terms of culturally changing a political system that has been incredibly classist to date.
Let's move away now back towards the polling issue, really. This week, an Essential poll, which is not essential in terms of that was essential, it was the all company Essential that did the poll, revealed that Australia is divided over the question of banning Muslim immigration, with 49% of respondents saying they agreed with the ban. According to Mark Latham and Andrew Bolt, Australia's political class need to recognize that most Australians believe Islam is incompatible with Western values.
Well, and I think the problem, of course, is reflected in this poll, which is stunning, not just for the overall number, but I think a third of Green voters were saying you should stop Muslim immigration, and a high number
40% of Labor.
40% of Labor. So it's across the political parties, and it's an absolute earthquake for the political elite.
So is that, Jay, let's start with you, because there is this question of how representative is a 1,000-person poll?
Well, if you look at polling methodology, I think it's plus or minus 3% is the margin of error for a sample of that size. But I think the issue for me with the poll was the fact that it was conducted by Essential, which is a left-leaning polling outfit. It has a lot of associations with unions, for instance. So in a sense, their value set is not of what the poll found, so to speak. What was also interesting was the point that Mark Latham pointed out in that grab, that 34% of Greens voters in that sample actually said that they would ban Muslim immigration. Now, I really have a lot of difficulty with this in the sense that, as a Conservative, I think that people are entitled to feel like they want and not be told to think what they want. But it seems to me that there are two things here, that the image of Islam as it's been portrayed, as we see it in the media, in terms of things that happen here and certainly things that happen overseas. We see the radical fringe, the radicalised few, very few, I mean, we're talking about fractions of a percentage, I would have thought, are actually tarring the image of Islam as a religion and the cultural values that Islam holds together in such a way that in too many people's minds fear is created. And the other side of it, I think, is that when you tell people often enough that the way they're thinking is wrong, the way that they aren't right, that they are stupid or they are bigoted, I think some people actually react to that and say, if that's the way you feel, this is what I'm going to say.
Louise, but isn't there that problem where sometimes if someone was to say something that conventional wisdom might call bigoted, shouldn't you just be calling a spade a spade?
Well, anyone who knows me, Sammy, would know that that's certainly my approach to these things. And I wasn't shocked at all by the result of that poll. I think that it's absolutely reflective of much of the fear-mongering within the political narrative and discussion that we've had around these things. And I think that has led many people, to the inevitable conclusion that banning Muslim immigration is the only solution, because we don't offer any other solutions up, and we convince people that this is the issue of the day that we must provide a solution to. And I think that it's a time for calm and intelligent leadership, and I see that regularly from within the Muslim community, but at times I think we could do with some calmer and some more intelligent leadership around this issue, because it sets the tone for the narrative across the country, and I feel very sad.
Okay, well, we're approaching the upload limit, so I will be back with a new video directly.